Hi everyone, my name is Adi, and today we've got a special guest, Tommy DeRosa. Tommy, how are you doing?
Hey, how's it going? Thanks for having me, Audi. Um, I'm doing okay. Just here to play, I guess.
Yeah, and so uh, you just finished up with a top 16 finish in the Players' Cup, is that right?
Yes, that's right. And it felt so great the whole time, I gotta say.
Tommy, if you haven't heard, he is something of an up and comer in the VGC scene. You're from the New York area, and you've been playing. I know you played a lot in Ultra Series, and everyone, all my friends in New York, were really scared about facing the Beedrill guy.
Yeah, I did develop a little bit of a rep.
And so now we've got the next iteration, the spiritual evolution of Beedrill. We've got Cinderace, and he did really, really well with this really cool Cinderace team. Tell me a little bit about the lead up to the Players' Cup and how you decided to use this team.
All right, so leading up to the Players' Cup, I did kind of poorly in the May I see. I think I was like seed 201, was it? We checked before
Mhm.
going into the actual placement. I did not really expect to get the invite. So when the email came, I was like, "Oh, wow. Okay, I guess we're doing this." um, and as it kind of stood, I had no team. I had no idea what I wanted to do. In the IC, I played a colossal team that was from like two series ago, and I just was kind of clueless. Um, like I think we got the invites 3 weeks before the event started, and those 3 weeks I just stumbled around the whole time. I was working with Mike D'Angelo a lot. We were trying to get something happening. We attacked trying to make Colossal work for a very long time, but we struck out there. We tried to do something with like Inteleon Rillaboom, and we kind of struck out there too. And then I was very convinced that I was just going to do miserable because I had no team. I think I locked in the first deadline. I locked in this Sun team that you actually gave me from Lexicon, and then I just was like, "Oh, this is a mistake. I don't like this team." And then they extended the deadline, and I was like, "Oh wow, now we have 24 hours to make something work." And I said to Mike, "Mike, give me something that I can kill stuff with," and he gave me this team. Um, Mike actually, I got this team from Mike, but Mike didn't build this team. Bingji built this team, and he used it to get first place in the Rose Tower Clash, I believe,
Yep.
which I wasn't even aware of until Mike gave me the team and prefaced it with that. I
Yeah.
didn't know.
And so the Rose Tower Clash was the first real big Series 5 tournament. It happened a week after the DLC dropped, and so about 2 weeks before we had to lock in the teams, I think. Um, you might notice I got top 8. I actually lost to Bingji, who ended up winning the tournament, and the Bingji's team was really cool. I think it was the first really good Cinder. Like if you look at this graphic, you really don't see. I think there's one other Cinderace in the entire top 16, and so he really innovated how Cinderace he made the team I think to beat. This was the team that I think everyone was scared of going into the tournament, along with Sun. And so this was the scariest Cinderace team in my opinion. And yeah, you picked it up and did really well with it.
Yeah, I've never met Bingji, but I admire him a lot as a team builder because I have a very similar play style to him. Like we're both very aggressive on lead, and we're not afraid to make reads after that. So I picked this team up with, like I said, less than 24 hours until the first game in the event, and I ran a couple games on ladder, and I just vibed with this team instantly, and I just went wild. I was like, all right, this is the play. This is what we're doing.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's always a great feeling when you pick up a team and it just meshes with you immediately. You play some ladder games, you just know it's a team that fits with your playstyle. Tell me a little bit about the Pokemon themselves and the sets that you used.
Cinderace is the very obvious figurehead here. The spread is nothing special. It's just, hey, we're going to go fast. Hey, we're going to hit stuff hard. But Cinderace only really runs 6 moves. I went with Bounce, High Jump Kick, Sucker Punch, Iron Head, and I went with no fire move, and that kind of catches people off guard right away. Um, but I didn't think I really needed it. The other win conditions on this team, they kind of revolve around Cinderace getting the right boosts, and since the fire move doesn't really have a boost, it just kind of does a lot of damage. I didn't think I needed it. Um, Cinderace is something you bring and you Dynamax almost as soon as it hits the field. Like there's not a lot of questions with Cinderace.
And that was one difference between your version of the team and the team that Big G originally ran, because he was running non-G-Max Cinderace with a, I think, Flare Blitz instead of Pyro Ball to give his Chandelure the Sun Boost when he could do that. And you instead opted to, I think you ran, you just said, I'm just going to give it the boost by clicking Max Darkness instead and weakening your special defense, which is just might have been a better option because now you get to use some other utility move that really benefits the team.
Yeah, I mean, I'll mention that when we're talking about the matches a little bit later. But with Sucker Punch on Cinderace, you can kind of just dance your way around any Psy spam matches, and you can also just kind of win on lead against certain opposing leads, which kind of makes it really really nice. Um, there's not a lot more I could ask for in a Mon from Cinderace. The ability you get 4 different stabs of whatever you want, and all the moves are like base 130 or better.
Yeah, the running joke is that Cinderace is the best steel type in the format.
It's also the best fighting type and the best flying type.
Yeah, well, it's got some competition for the best flying type with another mod on your team. You do have a Togekiss too.
Togekiss was one of the vehicles to make the rest of this team work. I didn't bring it to every game, but I brought it to at least one game in almost every set. It's the Crit Kiss set. Interestingly, I didn't have Air Slash on it, so I never maxed the Togekiss. Like this team has very obvious max candidates for the most part, and Togekiss, really, none of its max moves are quite useful. I think the way I kind of approach Dynamax is that I'm using it to get boosts, not to set up. I feel like using Dynamax to set up terrain or to set up weather is almost a waste of a turn. Not that's a little bit of an overstatement, I guess. But there's a lot more productive stuff you can do in a turn with Dynamax, and Togekiss really wasn't doing it. I preferred to. It's also a slow Togekiss, so I kind of preferred to let some of the other teammates do things while Togekiss kind of helped them out with the follow me. And Protect was pretty important on it too. There was a lot of games where I wanted to help Togekiss out. Maybe I wanted to boost it up with Toxtricity's Max Ooze and just not have it get KO'd that turn. So I would just Protect and they would throw a Steel Spike or something right into Togekiss and I would laugh. Yeah, the spread on this Togekiss, it just kind of does as much damage while still living things. It lives a regular, it's Iron Head from regular Cinderace, not the Steel Spike, just the Iron Head, and it also lives an Ooze from Venusaur without any boost. Yeah, so the next mon on the team is another like really good stuff mon, Rillaboom. This is a mon that belongs on just about every team, I think, right now. The set was U-Turn, Fake Out, Grassy Glide, and High Horsepower. I went with High Horsepower because we kind of, I think actually Bing G used High Horsepower as well. And I figured out really fast the reason was because Toxtricity was kind of growing in usage, and this team doesn't really have a great way to deal with Toxtricity outside of that. And Tox is pretty frail, so it kind of just goes down to any ground move that you throw in its direction, even if it's Gigantamaxed. So just having the high horsepower and a way to take it down is really, really useful when it otherwise rips through the team.
Yeah, I definitely think that a lot of people were struggling to find good ways to fit or ground coverage onto their teams with Excadrill dropping in usage. It used to be that you just put an Excadrill on basically every team, and now you don't, and there aren't a ton of great ground types to replace it. So it's great that you've managed to find a ground move to use because, as you said, there are a lot of Pokemon that don't want to get hit with strong ground type attacks.
Yeah, it stops it from getting walled by Torkoal if you need to bring it to a Sun matchup too, and that's kind of nice. That actually came into play a few times in the Players' Cup run. Otherwise, the move set's really straightforward. The Assault Vest is really awesome. Don't drill me on the spread because I don't really know what it does, but it did what it needed to do. Next mon, let's talk about Toxtricity because Toxtricity is the excuse me is the unsung hero on this team. Absolutely, you just kind of bring it to every matchup that you don't know what to bring. You bring Toxtricity and you max it and you win. The Tox is like at first I didn't actually know how to approach it. And that's actually really evident in like the first game in the tournament I played. It was streamed by the person, or rather, it was recorded and put on YouTube by the person I played against, which we'll talk about in a bit. But it was a mirror match. It was a Cinderace mirror match, and I just kind of led Cinderace into Cinderace, and we were going for speed ties that whole game pretty much. I didn't really figure it out till after that match. Like, oh, hey, I can use Toxtricity and not have to play the mirror and just win that match really, really easily. And that's kind of how I used it throughout the rest of the tournament. It's not really a impressive
Hmm.
spread by any means. It just does a lot of damage. We have the magnet because we kind of figured out that Tox wants to do more damage, but it wants to do more damage now, not in a turn with like throat spray or something. And also, if you just kind of were maxing at turn one, you would lose out on any throat spray boost because you can't use a sound move when you're Gigantamaxed. And that kind of just wasn't working for us. So we just threw Magnet on there, and Magnet helped out with all the damage calcs. If you're maxing it, you can just kind of get ooze boosts up, and once you get to even +1 with Toxtricity, you kill most things without a lot of effort. One and two hit KOing things that even that resist the overdrive.
Right, and then like you said earlier, if you're putting terrain up with your Dynamax, a lot of times you said at least it feels like a wasted turn for you. I don't always agree with that, but in the case of Toxtricity, you've got a max stun shock instead of setting electric terrain, and that has a really cool effect where it can either, I think it has a 50% chance to poison your opposing Pokemon and 50% chance to paralyze them, and so that is also a really interesting way to potentially get out of sticky situations by having your opponent's speed.
Yeah, there's a handful of matchups with this team where it's like not at all a good matchup, but you can still come out on top just if you happen to get a choice paralysis or something in that one's that like the instance you need it. All of a sudden the game's just turned around, and that's like really cool because you don't necessarily want to play to making your win condition hacks. But if you're making space, like you're clicking a lot of moves, the opportunity to get it just never really hurts.
Hmm. And that's something that we talked about with Gavin when he had Sing on his Clefairy, and I think it's just a very a recurring theme. You see it with like Togekiss with the Crit Kiss as well. You don't always need to get lucky, but giving your team the opportunity to get lucky is going to win you a lot of games sometimes.
Yeah, for sure. Because like Toxtricity is a win condition for this team on its own. If you're leading Cinderace and maxing Cinderace, if you get Tox to +1 in speed and you're outspeeding everything, you could just KO a lot of stuff. So if you do that on your own by paralyzing everything in front of you, that's a one-mon machine. All
Yeah, definitely.
right, next mon on the team, speaking of win conditions, is Melodic. I think that just degenerate sets are so excellent in this format. With Dynamax and the 3 turns being so important, like being able to put things to sleep is just really great. And by putting things to sleep, you're just buying yourself turns. And Milotic can then coil up more or recover and then just not care. You can, with this team, you can win a lot of games just by saying, hey, I'm going to bring Melodic in the back and I'm going to kill all the special attackers and then give it Steel Strike boosts and coil up the rest of the way. And then nothing can kill Melodic outside of a critical hit. Like, even once you get to like +3 or +4 defense, which is like really not uncommon. I found myself getting Melodic to very high defense in a number of games. Even Rillaboom can't really KO it. Like it can do a lot of damage, but you can recover it off until the grassy terrain goes away and just win.
Hmm. Definitely. It seems like a lot of people rely on Rillaboom to deal with Milotic on their teams, and then when you have a Cinderace or a Toxtricity or a Chandelure on the field, it's hard to position your Rillaboom effectively. And if you're saving it till the end game and the Milotic has 3 or 4 defense boosts, it's probably just not very effective at dealing with it.
Yeah, that's game over for you. um, the nice thing too about this set, like we went with leftovers because it was more health than a citrus berry when Melodic likes to stick around on the field for I think like after 3 or 4 turns it becomes equivalent to a citrus berry. And if you're adding that to grassy terrain recovery, you're recovering like a full citrus berry's worth of health like every 2 turns or 3 turns. And that was like really invaluable for the stally end games, which like is not really typical of this kind of really aggressive team.
Hmm.
Look
Yeah.
at a lot of the top players right now, like Wolf, Jeremy. others, a lot of them take like even your team really. You did quite well, and you guys all played defensively. Like you all take the slow game. You're switching a lot. You're kind of getting positioning with all of those positioning moves. You're just kind of giving a lot of opportunities for uh, the aggressive player to make a mistake. Because if you're an aggressive player and you make a lot of mistakes, it benefits you to end the game faster because that's less decisions and less mistakes and less hacks that could happen to your opponent's benefit. And this melodic kind of runs counterproductive to that, which was a little weird at first, but it makes sense comparable to like the rest of the team. And then on top of that as well, after 2 coils you can't miss a hypnosis. After 1 coil you can't miss a muddy water.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely. And just because a lot of like there's a lot of top players who I think do play in a similar playstyle. Like Bing Chi is just a great example of that. He's come onto the scene
Yeah,
a year ago as probably the most consistent player in North America and has been using teams just like this one. In fact, using literally this team
literally this team.
with incredible results.
Yeah, so speaking of incredible results, the last Mon on the team is Chandelure, who is an incredible Mon. This ghost on its own actually won me a handful of games just through its flash fire ability. Um, the open team sheets kind of helped out a lot with that. Like it was really easy to look at like an Incineroar or a Torkoal and say, hey, this Pokemon has no way to damage Chandelure at all. So I can kill everything else and not care about that one thing and just leave Chandelure in the end game and then laugh. You look at Tox and you look at Cinderace, and these are the mons that are doing damage. But Chandelure, not only does it do a lot of damage on its own, without having to Dynamax, but it also like just enables a lot of the other Pokemon on the team to go really wild through just stopping Trick Room. And it's also the only non-Dynamax form of speed control on the team, which makes it super duper important. You can kind of just end games when people go for Trick Room games by just imprisoning turn 1 and just not doing anything else besides attacking.
I do want to talk a little bit more about the common game plans that this team has and the ways that you approach matchups with this team, as well as some of the strengths and weaknesses of the team.
Generally, on team preview with this team, I'm looking for first thing I'm looking for is what I want the opponent to max, which is a pretty straightforward. Like most teams, you're going to try to figure out what the opponent wants to max. But once you kind of have an idea, like even if you have to take a guess, you can figure out what you want to max. Because in almost every single game, I think maybe 1 or 2 games, I didn't bring either of them, but nearly every single game, I'm bringing either Cinderace or Toxtricity, or both sometimes. And because, like I said, those are the 2 mons that like to max. Occasionally, you'll max Melodic, but that's kind of rare. You're only really doing that against like Sand or maybe Colossal, which we can talk about later too. Chandelure's never maxing. Togekiss is never maxing on this team either. Rillaboom can, but I have literally never clicked that button. And it's not even a Gigantamax Rillaboom. It's a regular Rillaboom. It's an aggressive team, so most people will look at it and they'll say, okay, yes, I just want to click buttons, which is a fair assessment. And a lot of times you can actually kind of resolve this team to getting the lead right and then clicking the correct buttons and just winning and not having to switch around. There was a number of games where I would get the lead right, like I win the turn 0, and then I know exactly what I want to do. I don't even have to switch around. Like I sit there and I click the attacking moves into the correct slots until something dies, and then I bring in the next thing, and then I just keep doing that same thing over again, which is I don't even know if I'd call that playing Pokemon sometimes, but it's a pretty straightforward way to play, and it will just if you're getting things right and you make the correct reads, you'll just overwhelm your opponent, and there's not much they can do. It'll make them sweat like quite a bit.
And I think that's a big part of why everyone was so scared about Cinderace going into the tournament is that it is this oppressive offensive force that you really have to know how you're going to beat going into team preview because it just does so much damage and can stack boost so easily. And if your opponent doesn't lead correctly into it or lets it do its thing just like for one turn, the entire team is getting run over.
Yeah, which is it's kind of nuts too because Cinderace is so oppressive, like you just mentioned, that there's a lot of opportunities for you to say, I know exactly what my opponent is going to lead because if they don't lead this, then they're getting run over by Cinderace, and that became a really important factor in a lot of my lead decisions. And it also becomes really important in a lot of the game plans. Like for the Sun game plan, and a lot of game plans versus Sun and versus Trick Room, you can kind of just lead Cinderace and Chandelure, and if they're going for the Trick Room, you imprison and you use a move on Cinderace, and if they're going for the Sun, you just attack into Venusaur and you Heat Wave with Chandelure, and you just kind of win those games. Like that's you're giving them an impossible choice, which is kind of the way this team wants to be played. You want to put on as much lead pressure as possible. You can move around. This team, it's not incredibly bulky, but there's a couple of like half the team has enough bulk that you can move around and reposition and do things correct. Like there's pathways to win the game even if you don't win right. But if you're even if you don't lead right, excuse me. But if you do lead right, this team wants to lead right because then it doesn't have to. It can use the more frail mons to just kind of run wild on teams and like I said, make them sweat.
Hmm. You talked a lot about the strongest the situations in which the team is strongest. What sort of matchups do you really struggle with when using this team?
The only really poor matchups I was able to find, like most matchups, I was able to find a way around. Like there was some pathways I had to think about it, but I can still find a way to win. Uh, the most difficult matchups are Sand with Intimidate, and also the very specific combination of Sun with Intimidate and Trick Room,
Hmm.
because those you don't want that was like that came up in my match versus Jeremy actually. Uh, he had a team that was such that like you can you have so many win conditions there that I don't want to deal with, that you can just you don't really have to lead perfectly, because even if you don't lead right, you can just use another win condition in the back after I've like either burned my Dynamax or like I just wouldn't have enough gas to deal with all three of those things,
Right.
and that did prove to be exceptionally difficult.
Yeah, and that's interesting because two of the four teams that made it through the North American Players Cup were Sand with Intimidate or with Incineroar, like you mentioned, and then two of the Sun teams. I think the only two Sun teams in top 16. There might have been more that I just missed, but including the one that we have a team report of with Owen Wright was Sun with Trick Room and with Intimidate. With him and with, like you mentioned, Jeremy also got top 8 with that. So those were two archetypes that managed to figure out, like I said earlier, Cinderace had a target on its back. Everyone knew that it was just incredible offensive threat, and so people had to figure out ways to make their teams beat Cinderace. And it looks like those are the type of innovations that people were using to do so.
Yeah, for sure. And like I should mention too, specifically with both those matchups, they're really difficult, but it's not like they're unwinnable either. This team kind of was really neat in that you can kind of be aggressive, but even if you get put on the back foot, you can be aggressive in a different way that kind of can make you finagle something to happen if you can catch them. Like you can make a good read, or you can catch them making kind of a greedy play or something
Hmm.
that's a little bit of an overextension. You can kind of jump back into it with the more bulky mons on the team, which is I thought it personally was really neat.
Let's talk about the your run through the tournament. And
Oh yes.
so you got all the way to top 16, and your first game was against the one and only Wolf Link.
Yes. Oh man. You know what? We had seen. I don't know if can you see it on that bracket? Yeah. There was actually two dandies in our bracket. So I saw my name next to Wolf's name, and the first thing I thought was like, oh no, I don't have a team, and I have to face a former world champion. This is not going to go well. That was the first thought. The second thought was, oh, there's two dandies. They definitely made a mistake. They're going to rebalance this bracket. And I think probably everybody thought that
Mhm.
until the day before, when I still really don't have a team I'm comfortable with. And the Europeans start playing, and all the Europeans start telling us, hey guys, they didn't fill in the no shows. And I think everybody collectively went, oh no.
Speak for yourself. I got a bye because of that, so I really can't complain. And for what it's worth, the other dandy is a real person. I don't know who it is, but they did actually play games and actually got pretty far in the losers bracket. So they are a real person.
Um, I mean, yeah, I did play Rajan later, and he made a joke that he was going to play as many dandies as he could. So leading into my matchup against Wolf, I knew that he was going to be a tough matchup, and I was very, very convinced that I was just going to end up like I didn't think I was going to qualify for the Players Cup, and then I was convinced that, ah man, I'm just going to end up going 0-2 drop, and I just not excited for this event until the day before when I picked up this team. Then Sohaib, I was practicing a couple of sets with him, and he was playing some team. The team he was running, he was playing, and he won a few times, but then he just couldn't win, and he just psyched me up so much that I went into that match saying, you know what, this is going to be the Florida man story. I'm not a Florida man, but this is going to be the Florida man story of local man too angry to lose. And that's just kind of what went down. Wolf actually, recorded the match and he put it on YouTube. And I've watched it a number of times. And every time I'm just so excited because I was in my own house just popping off, yelling, and getting excited. And no disrespect to Wolf or anything, but I was just so psyched up to play this match as soon as I started and I had the team.
Yeah, and totally understandable because I watched the match on YouTube afterwards. It's a really, really exciting match. You should definitely go check it out. And it really did come down to knowing that Chandelure can wall the ending, the last few months on his team, and winning with Chandelure.
I actually, again, no disrespect to Wolf, but I think I totally like, and I don't mean I played it poorly. Don't get me wrong. I don't think I played it poorly. I think I played it really well. But this team has, like I mentioned, this team has Toxtricity, which is there to deal with opposing Cinderace, and I just kind of didn't bring that. So I definitely in game one, I got really lucky with uh, winning Cinderace speed ties the first turn or two because he actually he went for a play where like if he wins the Cinderace speeds tie, he airstreams and then his melodic's super fast. So he would airstream and then scald and just take my Cinderace out turn one. So I didn't see that play, but it didn't matter because I won the speed tie and that was like really really helpful and I just won the game from there because I also went for a turn one blind hypnosis and I got it. Um, and the reason I went for that because I'm sure people look at that and they're like why would you do that? The reason I do it, I Melodic kind of is there to punish defensive play, and I know Wolf is a defensive player, so I kind of expected him to not want to go for the speed tie and just switch out. And I said if he's going to switch, he's going to potentially get something put to sleep. If he doesn't switch, if I hit the blind hypnosis, I probably just win the game. If I don't, then we're kind of still in the same position as long as I don't lose the speed tie there. And I hit the hypnosis, and that was just me winning the game there, pretty much. Uh,
Hmm.
it wasted his turns of Dynamax, and it was really straightforward from there. And game two, he actually ended up winning, and then for whatever reason, game three, he didn't bring the two Trick Room Mons that won him the game, game two, which I was listening to him talk about it, and I understand his justification. So it made sense, but because he didn't bring either of those things, the end game I played to was I have three Mons left, and my Chandelure dies to a grassy glide, but I can U-turn out my Rillaboom and just Heat Wave you and not have to worry about your Incineroar. And that's exactly what I did, and there was nothing he could do. He just had to take that play, and that was the end of the game.
And like you said, and one of the things that Open Team Sheet allowed you to do was say, oh, the Incineroar just doesn't have a Dark type move. I can play to an Incineroar's Chandelure endgame, whereas normally at a tournament you can't do that because Incineroar, in theory, can hit Chandelure super effectively.
Yeah, which is a scary position to be in. Talking about open team sheets, I really, really enjoyed open team sheets. Um, I know it sounds kind of weird to say that I think it made the game really easy, but I kind of felt that it did. I mentioned before, like not knowing something has protect gives you a lot of uh, basically free real estate to just double into that slot and not have to care. Um, and on top of that too, it's like it became really easy to sit down and establish win cons even before I got into the game. Like I didn't have to sit there and figure out like and guess what these moves the Cinderace has before I actually hit them. And then all of a sudden it's like this resolves from a an information game where you have to kind of be very conscious of what information you release and how you play the game to I know everything and I can just focus on the game plan. And I thought that was really neat.
Hmm. It definitely felt very different from traditional Pokemon. This tournament was held over 3 weeks, and so it's one thing to have your team sheet, your opponent's team sheet, 10 minutes before the game, and it's a very different thing to have it a week before the game. And we can talk a little bit about how that affected your round four matchup when you did have a week to prepare, when we get to that. But tell me about your round two.
All right, so round two, I was playing somebody with the in-game name of Token Female. This she's a SoCal player. They led turn one, game one with like Grimmsnarl Mudsdale. I knew exactly what it was gonna do, and I just kind of knew I could ignore the Mudsdale pretty safely. I also knew it was gonna Dynamax right away when I saw it, because that Mon just it immediately wants to Dynamax as soon as it hits the field. It wants to stack defense boosts and win the long game with like stamina and body press or something similar. So that the whole first game, I kind of just I brought Melodic, I coiled it up, and then I just sat there and killed everything next to the Dynamax Mudsdale, and then it came down to like a Mudsdale versus a Rillaboom and Melodic endgame, which they just couldn't win. And game one just kind of ended up really straightforward that way for me, and I was pretty happy to see that. Game two was a little bit more Toxtricity. Yeah, it was a little more complicated because they led with Toxtricity into my Cinderace and Rillaboom, and Toxtricity is scary. This team does not want to see opposing Toxtricity, as I mentioned earlier. The only way for me to really take care of it is through Rillaboom's high horsepower. And I did end up doing that, but I ended up doing that like maybe a turn too late, where my Cinderace had taken a bunch of damage. Luckily didn't get paralyzed, so I was able to squeak out the game later. But that had the Cinderace gotten paralyzed, that definitely would have went to game three.
Yeah, and Haley's a really strong player, like you said, SoCal player. Speaking of not knowing your opponents, I think round three you played someone whose in-game name was some Chinese characters. I still don't know exactly who this person is.
Yeah, I have no idea who this person is. They had a Sun team with Trick Room, so this was a really good matchup for me. I had a really safe lead in Cinderace and Chandelure, and they scared me quite a bit because they had Urshifu, and Urshifu's kind of difficult for Chandelure to do anything about. Um, but I was able to kind of get around it by airstreaming into it and heat waving instead of imprisoning both games, which I guess is kind of a read, or all three games rather. It's kind of a read, but it was like it worked out in my favor, I guess, because they really didn't expect me to get that aggressive. And from there, I kind of was able to then worry about the trick room and then go into a secondary game plan. Even though I was successful in the turn one, I kind of needed to go onto the back foot then to make sure that the trick room didn't get up from there, which was quite important. This team kind of just loses once it gets the trick room up against it. Like I set up trick room on my own sometimes against other faster teams or equivalently fast teams, but if the trick room's not a trick room that I want, that is a death sentence very often.
Yeah, and so you managed to pull it out, and it seems like you had a really solid idea of what you wanted to do against Hard Chrome. And then that got you into round four of the winners bracket, where we had, so that meant that we had a week in between, and you had a week to prepare for a very good friend of mine and a team that viewers of my channel might find familiar. Uh, it was in fact the same team that I used. You faced my good friend Rajan Ball.
Yes.
Um, so tell me a little bit about how you prepared for this matchup.
So I was very fortunate in that I'm very close with you, so I had an idea of what this team was trying to do. Rajan's team was trying to do because we had practiced a few times beforehand, so I had an idea. I was actually really scared of this matchup at first. Before I did any testing, I was like, this has a lot of ways to make me not kill things, and this team really wants to kill things. So I was pretty nervous going into it. Having a week to prepare made an enormous difference. Actually, I think it also probably negatively affected both of us actually, because just from seeing our plays in the first game. I could tell that we both did a lot of planning, and we both like, had we not had all this time, I think it was highly possible that the results would have been very different. Rajan knew his team a lot better than I knew my team at the time. This I had used this team for like 2 weeks maybe, and you and Rajan had this team around for quite a while at this point. Um, I grabbed Mike's attention the week before, and I was like, Mike, you are going to help me figure out how to beat this matchup because I have no idea. So we sat down and we did a lot of testing with this team, and we figured out that he was going to have to lead Gudra because anything else he leads, I can lead Cinderace into, and he can't really do much there. If he leads Lapras into Cinderace, then I can make it take way too much damage before the screen goes up. And if he leads Magnezone into Cinderace, then the Magnezone can probably just get KO'd by whatever's next to Cinderace, chiefly the Heat Wave from Togekiss or the Heat Wave from Chandelure. At first, like there was a couple of we tested this pretty much all week, like almost every day. I was trying to figure out what to do here. It maybe took like 3 days before we figured out almost a flowchart that really just won the game like 98% of the time. Flowchart I ended up going through was he was the first game he led Comfy Gudra, and I led Togekiss and Toxtricity. The 50-50, when he leads that, he pretty much just he procs his own weakness policy, or he lets me proc it. And either way, like I'm getting a hit off with Tox and I'm getting a hit off with Togekiss. So I clicked Max Ooze against the Gudra, and then I clicked Dazzling Gleam, and that does almost 75% to his Dynamax Gudra if I get the critical hit. And if I don't get the critical hit, then I have a whole nother turn to do it if he doesn't kill the Togekiss. If he did kill the Togekiss with a Max Hailstorm or something, then Cinderace comes in, and now I can high jump kick it for 75% of its health without even being Dynamaxed. So I had to kill the Gudra. That was my whole plan, is kill the Gudra and then figure it out from there. And that is what happened both games. The first game, he protected the Comfy, and my Dazzling Gleam procced his weakness policy, and he just took away my Togekiss that turn one. But he just couldn't heal up. He couldn't have Comfy and Rillaboom in at the same time as Gudra, so he was never going to be able to heal the 66 or 75%, whatever the boosted floral healing was. So I can kind of just I was able to do more damage than he was able to heal off comfortably, and I was able to just kind of win the game from there. Game two, he actually made a really cool play. Game two, at some point, he led differently that the next game, and I think he led Incineroar Gudra. And later in the game, he kept switching out the Incineroar to kind of just try to waste my Dynamax turns, which worked fairly well. Um, but later in the game, he Dynamaxed the Incineroar for one turn, so he can eat. I think he ate like a +2 overdrive or something, and then switched it out again into something else. And that almost cost me the game. That was a really cool play because it I needed to take a KO that turn, and if I didn't take the KO, then I had to be really ready for whatever was in the back because I knew that I might run out of health before I can actually end this game. But I was able to come out on top towards the end of the game. Rajan scared me to death that both of those games. This was probably like the hardest match of the tournament, I think, in my opinion.
And so this was really interesting for me because I'm good friends with Tommy and Rajan, and so I got to, and they aren't necessarily very good friends, so I got to watch both of them prepare independently, and tried not to give any or didn't give any inputs to either player. But like you mentioned, like he did max the Incineroar, and I think that going into the game, from what I remember of his prep, he said like, yeah, like this Gudra line works unless you do something very specific, and of course you figured out how to beat the Gudra line. And then he said, if you do figure that out, then I have to max the Incineroar. That's my out of winning this game. But it was a matchup that, at least looking at my team initially, like you said, it doesn't look like that bad a matchup. It looks like it's an awkward matchup, but not unwinnable. And then once you play enough games, you realize, wow, this is just a really difficult matchup because you can't really consistently use the Magnezone mode. You can't use the Lapras mode very consistently because of Toxtricity, and then the Gudra just takes too much damage from your strong physical attacks. And yeah, it's something that when you have a week to prepare,
You figure that out.
Exactly, and it makes the positive matchups even better because you just have a while to figure out every single possible line that your opponent can do and how to safely answer those lines.
Yeah, it's worth noting too that like even if you don't think it's a great matchup, like I didn't think it was a great matchup. I just had so much time to experiment with it that I was able to find the one way that I can get through this quite consistently.
Right. Yeah. And so after beating Rajan, you moved on into winners round five, where you faced Santino and his colossal team. Do you want to tell me a little bit about how that matchup went?
Yeah, this was actually a real. I got beaten pretty bad by Santino actually, and this was a quick game. It was pretty embarrassing for me actually. Personally, I usually I think it's kind of bad manners to say, "Oh, I played this poorly," rather than my opponent played well. I think my opponent played very well, but I also tunnel visioned so hard on killing the colossal, and that was it. Like my game plan, I went into it. I was like, I have redirection in a bulky water that just kills colossal, and I was right. It did kill colossal, but it had really no thought into how to deal with the rest of the mons on his team. Um, and it made it worse too because I had played Colossal for I mentioned I used it to qualify for the Players Cup. I played Colossal for quite a while before, so me sitting there and then realizing at like turn two, I was like, wow, I've put no thought into how to deal with the rest of this team. That was like a big wake up call for me. Like, wow, you can't just blindly go into matchups. Like, I actually have it written down on my notes here. The first game, I KO'd one of his Mons in the last turn. I didn't even get to see what he had in the back. I figured out a pathway to probably do better in this matchup, but he played Cole. Cole was not only was it such a great metagame pick, he also played it really well. Like he knew exactly what his team building too was excellent. Like he knew exactly what the way common teams were going to try and deal with this, and he just said, "Haha, no, you're not going to do that anymore." He had Cobra Berry on the Dragapult. That's like I couldn't even sucker punch the Dragapult for a KO. That was very very incredible thought by Santino and his team building, and really good play too.
Yeah, and this team as just an excellent colossal team. It's by, I mean, obviously he did by the best with it, but also like he lost one game, not one set, one.
Yeah, like the whole tournament, one game, which is incredible.
It really is incredible, and so he's of course very safely into top four, and we'll be seeing him in the main event in the top 16 of the Worldwide Players Cup, and I'm looking forward to that. And so, tough matchup here, and then you got dropped into losers, where you played Nora Bowman.
Yes, I did play Nora next, and this game was kind of interesting. It was also I mentioned earlier, like my game against Wolf. I didn't really figure out right away with this team that I could kind of use the Toxtricity mode to just ignore Cinderace mirror matches and win them. So game one, I ended up losing game one because I went for Cinderace speed ties and I just didn't win them. As I was sitting there clicking buttons, trying to figure out a game plan for game two, I realized I was like, wait, I have Toxtricity right here. And that Cinderace is going for flying type moves. I could just do this. And that's how I led into the next two games. And the next two games, I ended up winning both of them because Toxtricity plus Togekiss just put on so much pressure to this team that she was just not able to get her foot in the door with it. This game is actually she recorded this game and also put it on YouTube. It's a really good game. Check that one out too.
That win put you into the top 16 and put you into week three of the tournament. And going into week three in losers, you needed four straight wins to make it on to the Players' Cup. And you had a full week again to prepare for your next opponent, who was Jeremy Adetta. And so, and he was running a Sun team with Gyarados on it. Tell me a little bit about this matchup and how you prepared for it and what went down.
I knew how good this guy was going into the match. So I was like, all right, this I need to not play dumb. If I just try to click buttons, this is not going to work out. Uh, so I started looking at his team, and I realized, wow, there is just so many ways for him to win con me. This is a miserable, awful matchup. There's so many different ways he could play this team. I need to get everybody's opinion. So I ended up practicing with like 7, 8, 9 different people. I had running practice sets with me, and I kind of figured out that he's He's able to win if he sets up a late game Trick Room. He's able to win if he gets a +1 air speed on Gyarados before I do on Cinderace. He's able to win if he gets Venusaur to +1 before I do any damage to it, because then I can't kill it before it just runs through me. Like, he'll start taking KOs. So we did a lot of experimenting with the leads, and I could not find one consistent lead that like had options against everything that he could bring. I kind of realized, I'm sure he realized too, that this is going to be a lead roulette, and it was really awkward in that, like, okay, I can lead. If I lead Toxtricity plus something and he leads Sun, I probably just lose because he had double ground move. He had Earth Power Venusaur and Earth Power Torkoal. So I couldn't. Chandelure wasn't really safe, and Tox I could redirect some stuff away. But if he gets into the right position, he'll be able to take out Togekiss and still Earth Power me in the same turn. So Toxtricity wasn't really safe. I wanted to lead Cinderace for a while because Cinderace, Chandelure just kind of runs through Sun. But if he was leading Gyarados, then Cinderace gets intimidated, and Chandelure really doesn't do much to Gyarados. So I would lose to the Gyarados doing way more damage than my Cinderace could possibly put out and getting faster. And once the Gyarados is faster, that game was over. He could just do way more damage than I was able to deal with. We ended up kind of figuring out a game plan because through our testing, most of the people I played against, they figured that leading Gyarados was really safe because if he doesn't lead Gyarados, he gets run over by the Cinderace. So we were able to figure that out. And going into the game, I was really pleasantly surprised. I got really excited game one because I saw that he led Gyarados Dusclops into my Rillaboom and Toxtricity, which meant that I led correctly and he was going to be on the back foot in a matchup where I definitely did not want to be on the back foot. Um, the game one plays out. He goes for a helping hand and a waterfall into my Tox, but I G-maxed it, so I got the correct play on turn 1 too, where he didn't go for Trick Room, and I punished him for it. He lost his Gyarados, and then he brought in his Venusaur, and I have Rillaboom. I U-turned out with Rillaboom into Togekiss, I believe. I boosted up. This game kind of went poorly for me. I ended up, I whiffed a +1 Heat Wave on Togekiss that probably would have killed his Venusaur, which I had like 50% chance. I would have had to crit because it wasn't in Sun. So I think that I might have been able to come out on top if I didn't whiff the Heat Wave, but that wasn't certain. So I wasn't bummed out or anything. I thought I played it well. He lost the Gyarados win condition, but he was able to kind of play to a Trick Room Torkoal endgame because I wasn't able to stop the Trick Room and deal with the Venusaur at the same time. So he just kind of had to let one of those things happen, and the other one just didn't matter because after he gets Torkoal in position in Trick Room, that game is over. So I lost the first game, but not all was lost because in our testing, Mike and I kind of figured out that if he's probably going to lead Gyarados game one, and if I lead Toxtricity game one, even if he doesn't lose that game, you're not going to go into that match and say, you know what's going to help this game too? Leading Gyarados again. And we were right. We actually were right. I won game two on turn 0. He led Dusclops and T-Tar into my Cinderace and Chandelure, and that was beautiful because if you're leading a Mon that is weak to both Chandelure and Dark-type Cinderace that can't protect, that just basically says, I get to take a KO on turn 1 into this slot, and there's nothing you can do about it. Game 2 went really, really cleanly, and I won the game 2, and I got really hyped up. I was like, all right, I can do this. It's a bad matchup, but I'm still doing something. And then we go into game 3. And game 3, I ended up losing game 3, and I got outplayed, not terribly. He led Dusclops Gyarados again, and I led Kiss Tox again. So I won on the lead again. I got the lead right. And I also got the turn 1 right because this time he went for Trick Room and Waterfall, and I Follow Me Taunted. And that works out. Next turn, he protects his Gyarados and he Nightshades with Dusclops. but I said, nah, I'm not going to let you. And I ended up just stun shocking into the Gyarados, even though protected, took it out right there. Felt really good. I felt really confident. What I was not ready for was him to bring in the Venusaur and to not actually switch out the Dusclops. He just kind of went for an Earth Power in front of my Togekiss, which is not something I expected him to do either. Like, I have Toxin Togekiss, and I can follow me away that, excuse me, not Earth Power, Max Ground. I expected him to just to go for an Ooze and boost up a little bit, but he just went for the Max Ground, and I didn't follow me on Togekiss. So I ended up eating the Max Ground, losing Toxtricity, and then Trick Room didn't go up. Fortunately, he was paralyzed from the Sunshock, and he fully paralyzed too. But he had Torkoal, Dusclops, Venusaur, and I was quickly running out of ways to prevent him from doing the things that he wanted to do. So he was able to come out on top in the end of that one, and that was the end of my run. But I felt really confident after that too. Like, I played a really good game. It was personally, I think it was a poor matchup, but I still played it like a champ. I was making good plays. I think I did a good job, and even though my opponent he played better than me and he came out on top, I was still really satisfied with that, and I don't think I could possibly ask for more from myself or from that team.
Top 16 among the top 256 players in North America is still very impressive, and especially with the team that you just picked up the day before the tournament, and you had an incredibly difficult run, a lot of great players along the way, and
Yeah, great players, and they definitely did not make it easy either.
mhm.
That's for sure.
And I'm glad that at least two of your matches were recorded. I wish that more because it sounds like it was a very exciting run all the way through.
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
Yeah, and so if you want to try out this team, we have a rental code on screen right now, and then there's also a full paste in the description down below. So make sure to check that out, try it out. Really, I'd love to see people incorporate these ideas onto their own team because there's a lot of synergy in these six Pokemon, and as you can see, these work really well together. Tommy, do you have any final words or shoutouts?
um I don't think I have anything special. I want to give a big thank you to you, to Mike, to Sohaib, to Don, to all of Icehouse, Arsenal as well, everybody, because I don't think that I could have done so well without them helping me prep. Also, I want to give a big thank you to all of my friends who very consistently have been hyping me up to do this kind of incredible run, even when I was like, I don't think I'm going to do so well in this event. They consistently had my back, and they were like, nah, bro, you got this. So big thank you to all of them. Big thank you to you guys, and thank you very much for having me too.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on. It's been great talking to you, and it's been great learning all about this team. And yeah, until next time.
Take care.